So last year I was reading the book The Four Agreements. Have any of you read it? I can't believe it took me like 32 years to read this book because I swear it sat in my childhood home my entire life. And one day I'm at the bookstore and I'm looking at the cover and I'm like, why does this book look so familiar? And my mom was like, because it's been sitting in our house. Anyway, I finally read it, and I think it took me all of 2 hours because it's not even a long book. So, even more confusing why I had never read one of the most popular books of all time. But one of the points in the book really stuck with me. Like, when I read it, I was like, oof, why'd you have to come for me like that? So, I have to read it to you. It says, the limit of your self abuse is exactly the limit that you will tolerate from someone else. If someone abuses you a little more than you abuse yourself, you will probably walk away from that person. But if someone abuses you a little less than you abuse yourself, you will probably stay in the relationship and tolerate it endlessly. And I was like, oh my God. Because some things started to click in my little mind when I read that. Welcome back, friends. I am your host, Ambar Paloma, and you're listening to Lighthouse Within. This is the show where I pour you a refreshing glass of resilience so you can face life changes with more peace and more joy. We are continuing our Sense of Self series by tackling one of the most common forms of self abuse. Yes, friends, I am talking about negative self talk because let's be real, sometimes you can be your biggest bully and you deserve better than that. I also want to give you all a big thank you because recently we surpassed our first 1,000 downloads. Yay! Thank you so much to everyone who has tuned in, who has shared the podcast, and also really big special shout out to my editors for helping me bring the show to life twice a month. So please help me give them a round of applause. Woo! If you haven't subscribed yet, please go ahead and hit that button on whatever platform you're listening on to join the journey. And with that said, let's get started. I feel like negative self talk was one of the first things I had to work on when I was dealing with depression and social anxiety back at 19. At the time, it felt like my mind was a literal war zone. I remember I would even criticize the way I cut vegetables. Seriously, y'all, like cutting a carrot. Now, in my logical, stable 30-something-year-old mind, that sounds wild to criticize the way I was cutting vegetables. But when you're in that negativity loop, logic goes out the window and it becomes really hard to break out of it. Over the years, that voice has gotten quieter. And I can cut vegetables in peace these days, but it still shows up, especially when I'm going through change and especially when I've messed up. Why? Because change creates uncertainty. And in a really backhanded way, negative self talk gives us a false sense of control. We start guilting or shaming ourselves into getting it together. We beat ourselves up for making mistakes, especially if we feel like we're in a situation of our own making. And yeah, your logical mind probably knows better, but when that inner critic kicks into high gear, the problem solving part of your brain literally shuts down. And you start saying mean things to yourself like, I'm so stupid. Why didn't I see that? Why would I make that mistake? I should have known better. And that can really start chipping down your sense of self and your self trust, like we talked about in that last episode. Because would you trust someone who was mean to you every time that you messed up? I wouldn't. I've said this before and I'll say it again. The more often you turn to a certain mental habit, the more likely your brain is to go back to it every time you're under pressure or under a similar situation. So when we are turning to negative self talk, not so much turning because, in a sense, negative self talk will activate itself because it's your brain trying to protect you. But the more you dwell on it, the more you are encoding this habit into your mind. I want to help you go from the person who makes a mistake or is in a bad situation and says things like, I'm so stupid, I suck, nothing good ever happens to me, to being the person who says, okay, that wasn't ideal. I actually did mess up. So let me give myself some space to calm down first, because then I know I'll figure it out. So here's a visual I want you to hold on to because you know I love me a good analogy. Imagine you live near a forest, right? There are no trails, just grass and trees and moss. But every day you walk the same exact paths through the forest. Over time, the grass wears down, the dirt is exposed, and a trail forms down the forest. That trail is your brain's neural pathway. Now, let's say one day you decide to walk a different way, a new path, just a few feet to the left. The first few times, it's harder, less clear, but you keep going. And slowly, the old path begins to grow over. Grass comes back, and a new trail forms where your feet now land. That's how neuroplasticity works. That's how change happens. And that's how I want you to think about tackling negative self talk. Not with a giant leap, but with a new step taken over and over and over until a new path becomes yours. So, the first thing I want you to do to start carving out this new path is to catch it so you can check it and change it. Usually, when we hear negative self talk, we can tell, okay? Like, you can tell, like, I'm being so negative right now. And I know that you can because you probably have a full body reaction. You're probably feeling anxious, you're feeling tight, you feel that pit in your stomach, you feel that lump in your throat, you feel the endless negative loop. I know you feel it, okay? So I want to talk about, on top of those like sensations that you're feeling, I want to talk about some of the most common forms of negative self talk that we might encounter. Now, there's a lot, but I want to talk about three that I see very often in myself, in my friends, in my family, all sorts of people, right? So the first one is all or nothing thinking. This is when you say something like, if I can't stick to my routine, what's the point? This usually comes up because you're trying to protect yourself from the shame of being not enough. And let's be so for real. This is exposing the discomfort of sitting in the messy middle of change and uncertainty because it's so uncomfortable to go through change. And it's also a very vulnerable thing with no guarantee. It is almost easier for you to like give up and just not have it at all than to keep pushing forward, right? In a sense, this is a way that we self sabotage ourselves from what we really want. Some things that can help you here, like for real, invite nuance into the conversation. Because let's be honest, both things are probably true. Okay. If you are starting a journey, if you're in the messy middle of something, you probably aren't getting something right. You probably aren't being consistent. Okay. So you can acknowledge that. Be like, you know what? I wasn't consistent. I really wasn't. Okay. I really did make a mistake. Like we don't have to sugarcoat it, positive self-talk doesn't mean ignore my reality. Although I know there's a popular phrase going around right now that Delulu is the Salulu. But, acknowledge that, you know what, I didn't do XYZ consistently. But, and here's where the nuance comes in, but I am doing more than I used to, and I'm still committed to the journey. And that is progress too. Okay. So I want you in those all or nothing moments to find a way to invite nuance into the situation. Is there something that you can honor about what you're actually feeling? And then hit it with a but. Okay. Another thing that I want you to do when you're facing this all or nothing thinking is that I want you to go out and hear other people's stories. Okay. Because when you hear other people's stories, you're going to realize that probably what you're experiencing is really normal. So, for example, for me, that might be something like my podcast journey, right? I can go out and hear what other people are doing in their podcast or facing in their podcast or how their early stages were going. And it's going to help me realize like what I'm experiencing is probably really normal. And it's going to help me realize that what I'm experiencing is probably really normal. Same thing with something like a weight loss journey or with starting a new business or even with finding a life partner, right? Like these are all messy journeys until you get there. Like it's all a very messy journey. So having other people that you can talk to or learn from is a really great way that you can stay grounded when you notice this all or nothing thinking. Another one that is really common, I am so bad about this one. Catastrophizing, okay? Listen, okay. I am calling all my anxiety people to the front. There's no shame here. But this is a reminder to not believe everything you think because catastrophizing sounds a lot like saying, if I mess this up, I'll lose my job and never recover. Another one. This breakup means I'll be alone forever. Yo, the brain is so sneaky because it really was like, you know what? I'm going to hit you with your literal worst case scenario. So, just in case it does happen, we would have already been processing it and it can hurt us less. Okay. I'm telling you, your brain is really trying to look out for you, but it is not always doing it in the most helpful way. First of all, whatever you're fearing is probably not true. And second of all, I have so much faith in you to handle what comes. A Cornell study actually found that 85% of the things that we worry about never even come true. Like, legit, you probably will not face your worst case scenario. And of the 15% of the times that it did happen, people felt like it was easier to deal with than they actually expected it to be. But listen, I know if you're listening to a podcast about tackling negative self thought or about tackling negative self talk, that logic isn't always enough to calm you down. When you're stuck in the negative self talk loop, your emotions are at a height where they have run away, okay? They're in another stratosphere. So if you're catastrophizing, I would say this is really common when you are in fall or an early winter season. So you have like just faced the big life change or you're anticipating for, that other shoe to drop, right? So, I actually want you to counter it by doing something that gets you out of your mind and into your body. Go for a walk in nature, meet up with a friend, and please reach out to support to a therapist, a coach, or a friend. Okay. And if you reach out to a friend, do me a favor, lean in. Please reach out to a friend who's a good source of emotional support because not all support is created equal. And I'm sure you can think of right now a friend that you're like, yeah, every time I hit up that person, they just make me feel worse. And I'm sure that you can think about somebody else that you're like, every time I hit up that person, they make me feel better. Don't hit up the person that makes you feel worse. I made that mistake after my last breakup. Okay. The third most common one is should statements. Oof. Should statements. Things like, I should be more productive. I shouldn't be feeling this way. I should have figured this out by now. I shouldn't have given them another chance. I should be further ahead in life. Mm. This one especially comes up when you have internalized pressure from either your culture, your family, or perfectionism. I'm looking at you, ambitious millennials. I'm one of you, so, this is a safe space. It can also come up when you're feeling a lot of shame about something. Again, that shame of like, why didn't I know any better? How could I let myself be in this situation? But the reality here is that you can't change the past. You can't change the choice that you made, but you can choose what you do next. There's actually this really great quote that I always think of when I'm in the situation. And I read it on a sweater when I was 12. But I swear it's still one of my favorite quotes, like over 20 years later. Do y'all remember that Store Limited too? Like, I don't know if you do, but it was a clothing brand for preteens. Anyways, I remember my friend had a sweater from that store in middle school that said, it's so profound, like literally, mic drop. Should've, could've, would've, but didn't. And I love it so much because it's like when you're in those moments, you're like, I should've, I really could've. Man, if only I would've. But you know what? I didn't. I didn't. And the reality is, maybe I was doing the best I could with what I had in the moment. Or maybe I wasn't listening to myself enough. But instead of dwelling on the past, I'll see what I can learn in the present so I can make a better choice for myself in the future. Because honestly, at this point, that's all I have. This was so me a few weeks ago because I actually made a giant mistake at work and I felt so bad about it. Like I was truly overcome with so much shame because it caused a big problem for my company. And I was hitting myself with I should have checked. Why didn't I check? I always check. And I felt so bad in that moment. But I decided to treat this situation with some self compassion because that's all I had in the moment. So I give myself one day to feel like absolute crap about what I had done because my feelings of shame were valid. I really should have done something differently. And I didn't, right? So I took that day to feel bad about it and think about what I had done. And then I decided not to dwell on it any further and to just think of what I could do to prevent making such a big mistake again in the future. Remember, self trust is not just about always doing everything perfectly because mistakes happen, but it is about lovingly showing up for yourself when the time comes. I want to bring it back to the quote from the Four Agreements, the one about how we only tolerate the level of disrespect that matches the way we treat ourselves. I used to have really low self esteem and a brutal inner voice. You've heard me talk about this. And while I've always had some incredible friends, I also kept finding myself in dynamics with romantic partners or other friends that weren't exactly good for me. I would also tolerate all sorts of things at work. In my last relationship, my boyfriend at the time actually called me out on some of the ways I was being mean to myself. Like every time I would mess up, I would say things like, "Ugh, I'm so stupid," or "Ugh, I'm so dumb," or even, "Ugh, I'll never get this right. I'm just not good at this." And every time he'd be like, "Hey, stop saying that about yourself. You're very intelligent. You just made a mistake. You're going to figure it out." And I didn't notice it then, but I see it now. Every time I'd say those things to myself, he was essentially interrupting my habit loop. So, if we're going back to the analogy of the forest, it was like he was standing in the middle of the path that I had already carved, being like, "Hey, stop walking down this path and walk on this new path instead." And over time, my mind started changing. I became less critical of myself and of others. But maybe even more importantly, my tolerance for negativity and disrespect started to drop really quickly. Suddenly, I would be in situations where people would be like, quote unquote, belittling me as a joke. And I'd be like, why are you talking to me like that? Or like people would be like really harsh on me. And I'd be like, yo, chill out. Like, why are you being so like mean about this? You know? I'd be like, yo, I just made a mistake. But because I had stopped talking to myself like that, it would really set me off when somebody else would talk to me like that. Cause I'd be like, excuse me? Why are you talking to me like that? It felt very off. Whereas before, it might have felt off in my body. Like I would notice that I didn't like it. But because I was so used to hearing it even in my own head, I wouldn't stop anybody else from doing it to me either. And we're going to talk about this so much more in the next episode on boundaries, but it really made me realize how much of your boundaries really starts with you. Because if the way that you treat yourself is already on a certain level, it's really going to set you off, or like somebody treating you less than that is really going to just seem off, just weird. Like, why are you treating me like that? You know, I don't disrespect my time. So why are you disrespecting my time? I'm not sitting around here in confusion and indecision, so why are you doing that to me? I don't put myself down, so why are you putting me down? Like, but when you already do those things to yourself, it's going to seem less weird when somebody else does it to you. So when you raise the standard for how you treat yourself, the standard for how others treat you naturally follows. If you've enjoyed this episode, please remember to hit subscribe and stay tuned for the rest of the series on rebuilding your sense of self. Before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final message. So, if you'd like, please close your eyes, place your hand over your heart, and take a deep breath with me. Inhale, bringing yourself into this moment. Hold it as you feel the ground beneath you. supporting you. And exhale, releasing any tension in your mind. Dear friend, your inner voice is the architect of the home inside your mind. What environment will it create inside your home? Will it tear down the walls and point out the cracks? Or will it patiently repair the spots where the paint chipped away, delight in straightening the crooked pictures, and take pride in upgrading well-loved rooms? Will the architect of your home say, "This place is a disaster"? Or will it say, "This is a safe space for you to come home to, not with perfection, but with peace in your heart"? The choice is always yours, my dear. Take another deep breath with me and hold it. And exhale slowly. You can open your eyes whenever you're ready. I'm really looking forward to continuing this series with the next episode on building boundaries for your sense of self. In the meantime, please have a fantastic, amazing day, and remember to be kind to yourself. Bye.